We know that Minig Yisrael has it, of course, that we stay up over the course of the first night of Shavuos, and we stay up learning, stay up saying Tikkun Leil Shavuos. This is a minhag which of course has been accepted by the overwhelming majority of Klal Yisrael, and it's a minhag which is brought in the Magen Avram, different reasons which are given. Magen Avram writes that the reason we have such a minhag is because the Isa B'Zoya Shechasidim Rishonim Hayu Neurim Kol Halayla V'Oiskim B'Torah Ukvar Nogu Roiv Halaimdim Lasas Kein V'Tam HaMinhag, says the Magen Avram, Ve'Evshel Laseis Tam Al Pi Pshutai Lefi Yisrael Hayu Yishenim Kol Halayla V'Hutzach HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Ha'ir Oisam K'De Isa B'Medrash L'Chein Anu Tzrichim L'Sakinzu. So the Magen Avram understands that the reason that we have this minhag to stay up over the course of Shavuos is because we are being misakein for the fact that Klal Yisrael were sleeping when it was time to be mekabel the Torah. They overslept that day, and therefore we have to be misakein that, so therefore we're not even going to go to sleep. We've mentioned in the past the fantastic insight of Reb Schwab in explaining a literally unbelievable measure, something which is so difficult to understand. Klal Yisrael, they've been waiting for Kabbalas HaTorah from the moment Moshe Rabbeinu told them why they were leaving Mitzrayim. They've been waiting for Matan Torah. They've been dying for Matan Torah. According to many midrashim, they asked, why is Matan Torah not earlier, the minute they got out of Mitzrayim? Why are we not having Matan Torah right now? And they've been, according to many midrashim, they've been counting down towards Matan Torah. So finally the day has come. The time has come. They've been preparing for the entirety of Siras HaOmer. They're preparing the last 3 days, the Shloshis Yimei Hagbala, and they overslept. Hayitachen. Is it really possible to say that they overslept? So Rav Schwab beautifully explains that what was going on over here was not the mistake. Klal Yisrael didn't oversleep Chalila the way that we oversleep. They didn't miss their alarm. They didn't hit the snooze button. Klal Yisrael understood, or Klal Yisrael were under the erroneous assumption, but an assumption that the entire world was under at the time, and continues to be under, much of the world at Yom Hazeh, and that is that there is this tension, this battle between the Ruchni and the Gashmi, between the spiritual elements of our lives and the physical elements of our lives. And therefore Klal Yisrael said, it is impossible for us to engage in the Ruchni while we are still in our state of our Gashmi. After all, like a Navi, most Nevi'im can't speak to the Rabbi Shalom, the Rambam describes, while they're in their physical awake state. So therefore, Klal Yisrael said, our Kabbalas HaTorah, no doubt, is going to have to be while we are asleep. B'derech chaloim. And therefore, Klal Yisrael b'dafka went to sleep because they were so excited for Kabbalas HaTorah. Because they couldn't wait for Kabbalas HaTorah. They went to sleep that night. They said, L'shem yichud, before going to sleep. This is going to be our sleep, in which this sleep we are going to be mekabel the Torah. Because they understood that Kabbalas HaTorah has to be, if it's going to be the event that it's supposed to be, and that it was going to be an event where we actually experience the Rabbi Shalom Panim El Panim, it's obviously going to be an event that happens not when we are awake in our physical states, but it's going to be an experience that we can only experience while we are asleep. And therefore Klal Yisrael slept that night envisioning that Kabbalas HaTorah would be experienced in their sleep. And the Rabbi Shalom says that the entire point of Kabbalas HaTorah is to detract from such a notion, is to counter such a notion. This is exactly what we're celebrating, says the Rabbi Shalom. This is exactly the landmark historic event that now, with our Torah, the two elements of our lives aren't at odds with each other. The Torah is not in trying to ignore and only the physical and only speaking to the spiritual, but the Torah gives us an approach in order to live with both of the aspects of our lives together. This was the machlokes between Moshe Rabbeinu and the Malachi Asharis that took place at Kabbalas HaTorah. The Rebbeinu Shalom, Moshe and Malachi Asharis tell the Rebbeinu Shalom, Ma'enosh ki sizkereni, you're giving the Torah to Abbas Adam. What is Abbas Adam going to do with the Torah? This is exactly what they were saying. They're physical beings. What could they do with the Torah? And Moshe Rabbeinu responds to them, no, the Torah was created for physical beings. And the Rebbeinu Shalom, of course, says, yes, we're going to give the Torah to physical human beings. So yes, it's going to be while you're awake, because that's exactly the point of Kabbalas HaTorah. The exact moment, the exact celebration that we are celebrating is the experience, is the celebration that a human being in the state of being a human being is able to appreciate and able to be mekabel the Torah. And this, of course, is how the Achreinim explain that Gemara that tells us that even though there's a major machlekas when it comes to all the Yom Tovim, whether Yom Tiv should be celebrated Kuloi LaHashem or Kuloi Lachem. How does one celebrate a Yom Tiv? Right? We have the Gemara tells us in Maseches Pesachim and Daf Samach. The Gemara says, "Sava b'chol Yom Tiv oikul Hashem or v'kul lachem." Or you could be Chatzil Machlekes, Chatzil Hashem, Chatzil Lachem. Do we engage in the spiritual and the physical, or is it entirely spiritual, entirely physical? But says the Gemara, Les man depolag, Hakol Moedim Ba'atzeres Ba'ina Nam Lachem. Everyone agrees, even though on other Yom Tovim, even though those shitas that on other Yom Tovim, it could be that you could live a Yom Tiv, you could experience the Yom Tiv and gain the full aspect of all the entirety, the fullness of a Yom Tiv, with Kuloi Lachem, totally engaged in Milei Deshmaya, totally engaged and enwrapped in spiritual pursuits. A person, according to some shitas, could experience the entirety of a Pesach, a Sukkot, while being totally mufresh and muvdul from physical pursuits, entirely engaged in spiritual pursuits. When it comes to Shavuos camping, Hakol Moedim, everyone agrees. Atzeres me'ina nami lechem. Why? Because the entire celebration of Atzeres is that not Malachi Hashares are experiencing the Torah. Then we could have kept it in Shemayim. The entire celebration of Atzeres, of Shavuos, is that we as physical human beings, with all of our chesroinus, with all of our physicality, with all of our gashmias, are able to be mekabel the Torah. That's the celebration of Shavuos. So yes, we're going to partake in our physical lives as well, because to ignore our physical lives on Shavuos would be to ignore what the celebration of Shavuos is. If we're going to act like Malachim, the Rebbeinu Shem could have kept the Torah with the Malachim. The celebration of Shavuos is because we are human beings, because we are physical. That's therefore on Shavuos everyone agrees, but Ina Nami Lachem. And that was the victory of Moshe Rabbeinu over the Malachi Hashares. And this is why, says Rav Schwab, we have the minhag of staying up the entire Leil HaSeder to be misakin for their erroneous assumption that the only way we could be makabel Torah if we put our physical bodies to rest, and therefore they went to sleep to be makabel Torah. And the Rebbeinu Shem says, you got it all wrong. You're not supposed to go to sleep to be makabel Torah. You're not supposed to put your physical selves to sleep to be makabel. On the contrary, you're supposed to be in your physical states. That's the celebration of Shavuos. This is why on Shavuos we bring the Shtei HaLechem. What does the Shtei HaLechem represent? Of course, the Shtei HaLechem represents the Yetzer Hara. It's the only time, one of the only times Chametz was brought on the Mizbeach. Chametz is brought on the Mizbeach. Chametz is the Yetzer Hara. On Shavuos we say, yes, even the Yetzer Hara, even the Gashmi, even our physical, which usually detracts, even that could be used. On Pesach it was only chametz. We weren't ready to be mekadesh the gashmi. With the Torah, though, Kabbalas HaTorah allows us to be mekadesh the gashmi, to use our physical selves to serve the Rebbeinu Shem. That's the essence of the Torah. Malachi Hasharis don't need the Torah. Human beings need the Torah. Hakol moedin v'atzeres be'ina nami lachem. So let's just review very quickly some of the halachos of what happens when we stay up all night. Leil Shavuos happens every year, of course, Baruch Hashem. But it takes a little bit of chazara. What are the things that are relevant? So when a person stays up the entirety of the night, it's first of all important to remember, we're eating and drinking throughout the night. Me'ikar hadin, a person is not allowed to eat for a half hour before alois hashachar. If you began eating already before that half hour, so you're allowed to continue eating. but you're only allowed to continue eating until Alois HaShachar itself. Once Alois HaShachar comes, the person has to stop eating and drinking. Drinking that's used specifically, like coffee, to help a person stay up and learn, that would be allowed, but we have to stop, other than that, stop eating and drinking before Alois HaShachar. Similarly, when it comes to the learning itself, we know that there's a major machlekes harishonim when it comes to birchas haTorah. Generally speaking, we're going to recite all the birchas hashachar except for two birchas hashachar. Birchas hashachar v'al kailin neshama and hamav shena. Those birchas hashachar, a person that was up the entire night can't recite. And those two birchas hashachar, he should be yotze from someone that slept. What about birchas haTorah? This is a major controversy. Why is it such a controversy? Major machlekes rishonim whether birchas haTorah is recited every morning because we were mafsik by sleeping, or no, chazal or kaveya, birchas haTorah is said every day. What's the nafkamina? Let's say I wasn't mafsik by sleeping. A major machlekes rishonim, not exactly clear how we paskin. So, ideally a person should do one of the following things. Try to get someone else who did sleep to be moitzi him in the birchas haTorah. However, there is another mahalach as well, which is perhaps more accessible to us this year, and that is the mahalach of Rabbi Kiva Eger. Kiva Eger points out that if a person goes to sleep for a nice nap before Shavuos, this year it's going to be Shabbos. So of course you're allowed to sleep on Shavuos, on Shabbos in preparation for Shavuos. You're not allowed to say, I'm going to sleep so that I could stay up tonight, but you're allowed to go to sleep on Shabbos. If a person sleeps on Shabbos afternoon, says Rabbi Kiva Eger, and then he stays up the entire night, comes the next morning, he's allowed to, Bishaburu quotes it, he's allowed to say Birchas HaTorah. Why is he allowed to say Birchas HaTorah? Says Rabbi Kiva Eger Memanavshach. If the Mechayev for Birchas HaTorah is a new day, it's a new day. If the Mechayev for Birchas HaTorah is sleeping, I slept earlier today. So if a person slept for a regular Shenas Keva for a half hour on Erev Shavuos, then he slept and went through the whole night, according to Rabbi Kiva Eger, he'd be allowed to make Birchas HaTorah. When should Birchas HaTorah be recited? Me'ikra din, you should recite it right away at the beginning of Alois HaShachar. Right, what Alois HaShachar? Because there's a tzad that you're chayiv right away at the new day. The minhag, generally speaking, is that we don't stop our learning to say Birchas HaTorah, and therefore one could continue. So that's when it comes to Birchas HaTorah. Again, Hamav Shena, Elokai Neshama, Birchas HaTorah, either Rabbi Kiva Eger or hear from someone else. And then we, of course, have the bracha of Al Netilas Yadayim. Al Netilas Yadayim is a big machlekes rishonim. Why do we recite Al Netilas Yadayim every morning? Three shittas in the rishonim. Some rishonim say we do Al Netilas Yadayim every morning because l'chorah, when we were sleeping, we touched places which weren't clean. Others say that no, every morning we begin our day, it's like a new day of Avodas Hashem. What does a kohen do before he starts his Avodas Hashem? He washes his hand. That's why I have Netilas Yadayim. And others say this concept of Ruach Ra, spiritually speaking, there's Ruach Ra. So let's say a person didn't go to sleep, so it's a big machlekes. Did he touch any part that's dirty? Probably not. Did he become a Bria Chadasha? No, he didn't become a Bria Chadasha, he didn't go to sleep. Is there Ruach Ra? A big machlekes rishonim. Is there Ruach Ra when a person doesn't sleep at night? So this again is a big machlekes, and we would advise that a person, like the Mishnah Berurah says, that a person just stayed up the whole night cannot make a bracha of Al Netilas Yadayim, but a person can be either Oiset Tzrachav, he makes Gedolim, then he can make the bracha of Al Netilas Yadayim, or he's Matal Mayim, he does Ketanim together with being Mishavshev, making his hands a little bit dirty. That too is Mechayiv Al Netilas Yadayim, and through that a person is able to make the Al Netilas Yadayim. He discussed how we can make a Birchas HaTorah when it comes to the Eitzah of Rabbi Kiva Eger, and then the only things that he's not able to make is Elokai Neshama and Hamav Shena. Through this, a person will have the appropriate knowledge to know how to facilitate this experience of staying up the entirety of night, which again is there to remind us that our Kabbalah HaTorah doesn't take putting the body to sleep, as Rav Schwab explained to us, but rather quite on the contrary. Our Kabbalah HaTorah is for human beings that are fully in their physical state. That's the entire celebration of Shavuos. Hakol Moedim, the Ba'atzeres, Ba'ina Nami Lachem.